Hello and welcome back to the Department of Reinvention. In today's video, I will be showing you the process of upcycling an old, very paint-covered chest of drawers, stripping back all that paint, showing the new wood and giving it some new style. Now, I got hold of this chest of drawers from a fellow upcycler who basically had a pile of projects in her garage she wanted to get rid of, and I took this one off her hands because I was interested in the challenge of getting all of this paint off. And there's a good 5 layers of paint under all this. You can see it's a pretty interesting couple of shades of purple and yellow, and there's also a couple of coats of an oil-based, maybe, white paint underneath. So first up, I'm removing all of the old bits of hardware. As you can see, a lot of it is missing, so I'm going to give it some new hardware at the end. And now it's time to strip back all of that paint off the wood. Today I'm using Paint Panther. It's quite similar to Nitro Moors, but the smell isn't quite as bad, and it's also not that bright green. It's a pretty decent paint stripper, as you'll see shortly. I gave it a good coat of the paint stripper and then went back about 15 minutes later and gave it another layer of paint stripper over the top. And now going in with a painter's tool, slowly trying to scrape off all that sludge off the chest of drawers. You can see there's some pretty stubborn paint underneath all those coats. I gave it a second coat of paint stripper, but that wasn't quite as successful as the first one, and removed it with a tungsten carbide scraper. And you can see it's taken some stuff off, but it's still pretty stubborn under there. After I'd taken as much paint as possible off with the paint stripper, I went over with a sheet sander using 120 grit, and you can see me using it on top of the drawers. As you can see, the paint stripper and sanding combined doesn't get rid of all of the paint. This is a cross-grain oak veneer. As you can see, the paint has got trapped in the little grooves of the grain. So I went in with some paint stripper and a small nylon brush. I did at one point use a metal brush, and you will see a little bit later why that is a really bad idea. I went over everything with a second sand, but this time with 240 grit sandpaper. I went over the inside and outside of each drawer with the 240 grit sandpaper just to refresh it and make it look a little bit newer. And here you can see why you shouldn't use wire wool or wire bristle brushes on oak. Lots of tiny little rust spots from where the steel wire has broken off in the grain. Oak is more inclined to develop rust spots when in contact with metal than other types of wood due to its high acidity. So the solution to fix this is to use something called oxalic acid. It's pretty cheap and pretty easy to get hold of from Amazon and some other places, and just giving it a coat with oxalic acid bleaches these rust spots out of the wood. You can also use oxalic acid to lighten wood and to get rid of stubborn stains. I use some Danish oil over the bare wood, the inside and the outside of the drawers. That gives it a little protective coating and also brings out the grain quite nicely. I applied the Danish oil with a rag quite liberally, and then go over with a dry rag just to soak up the excess. And now comes the mammoth masking tape challenge. I decided to go with a sort of stripe starburst design, as you'll see towards the end. And here I use vertical stripes of masking tape on the front and the sides, and then on top had them graduating towards a point, and so used lots and lots of masking tape. When cutting masking tape on a design like this, you want to apply enough pressure to cut the masking tape, but not so much pressure that you end up cutting into the wood. Although the design means that if you do catch the wood, it's kind of covered by the design, so it's not the end of the world. So a tip to minimise bleed through when doing a masking tape based design is to, when you've applied the masking tape, go paint over the edges with a paint that matches the colour underneath the tape. But when it comes to bare wood, instead of using the paint, you use a clear varnish instead. It creates a little barrier at the edge of the tape to stop paint bleeding underneath. And here I'm using Rust-Oleum, answers on a postcard for that one. I'm using the Chalky Finish Ink Blue, very beautiful blue that I've used before. And this took about 2 to 3 thin coats to get a nice consistent colour all over. The pink is Rust-Oleum's Raspberry Ripple, also really vivid, lovely pink colour. Now, because I wanted some gold stripes and I wanted to use spray paint because it gives a more consistent colour with gold paint, I needed to use some plastic sheeting and masking tape to cover up all the bits I painted before, just leaving the bare wood ready to be spray painted. For the gold, I used Rust-Oleum's Brilliant Finish Gold Spray Paint and gave it a couple of coats. Please enjoy the very satisfying masking tape stripping. Once everything was dry and all the masking tape was off, I went in with a couple of coats of Ronseal's Clear Matte Varnish. I added some lovely gold bar draw pulls to finish it off. And here is the finished piece. I'm really happy with how it came out, considering how much paint was on it to start off with, but I think it's looking kind of fabulous now. As always, the details of what I used are in the description box. And while you're there, maybe throw me a subscribe and a like, maybe. Thank you.